War. War never changes.
You some kind of war junkie?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Welcome to the War 102 podcast, where we explore the doctrine, theory, philosophy, and history of warfare. I'm your guide, Paul Darling, and I want to share what I learned in nearly 30 years in uniform. So let's get to learning about the most influential activity in human history, war. Welcome to episode 114, Simon Moves South. The victory at Boyaca in 1819 transformed the struggle for South American independence. By securing New Granada, Simon Bolivar gained access to financial resources, manpower, and a strategic base that fundamentally altered the balance of power between the revolutionaries and the Spanish Empire. Yet from Bolivar's perspective, the campaign represented only an intermediate objective. Spanish authority remained firmly established in Peru, and experienced royalist armies continued to defend the core of Spain's South American empire. Bolivar understood that independence for Venezuela and New Granada would remain vulnerable so long as Spain retained the ability to project military power from the Andes. His strategy therefore expanded beyond national liberation toward the complete destruction of Spanish military authority on the continent. This broader vision distinguished Bolivar from many contemporary revolutionary leaders. Rather than treating military campaigns as these isolated national struggles, he conceived of northern and western South America as a single strategic theater. Geography, communication, and imperial administration linked the Spanish possessions together, and he believed the revolutionary response had to be equally comprehensive. Victory in one region would remain incomplete unless accompanied by coordinated offenses elsewhere. Consequently, Bolivar's campaigns after 1821 demonstrated an increasingly sophisticated appreciation of grand strategy, integrating military operations, diplomacy, political organizations, and coalition warfare across multiple theaters. Following the establishment of Gran Colombia, Bolivar delegated increasing responsibility to trusted subordinates while concentrating on the strategic direction. This reflected both necessity and confidence in the officers who had emerged during the preceding decade of warfare. Among these commanders, Antonio José de Sucre became the most important. Younger than Bolivar, but exceptionally capable, Sucre combined tactical competence with administrative skill and personal discipline. Whereas Bolivar excelled at inspiring armies and directing broad campaigns, Sucre demonstrated remarkable ability in translating strategic objectives into carefully executed military operations. The relationship between Bolivar and Sucre illustrates one of the Liberator's greatest strengths as a commander. Bolivar consistently identified talented officers, delegated authority appropriate to their abilities, and resisted the temptation to micromanage operations. If only we had more of those. Although disagreements occasionally emerged, he generally allowed experienced subordinates considerable freedom in executing campaigns, so long as they remained aligned with broader strategic goals. The liberation of the territory that today constitutes Ecuador became the next major objective. Royalist forces retained control of Quito, protected by difficult mountain terrain that favored the defense. Conventional frontal assaults would likely produce heavy casualties, while offering, at best, uncertain prospects for success. Accordingly, revolutionary commanders sought to maneuver around the Spanish positions and exploiting the mobility and local support, rather than relying solely upon direct confrontation. The decisive engagement occurred at the Battle of Pichincha on May 24, 1822. Sucre commanded the Patriot Army during the operation, while Bolivar supervised the broader strategic effort. The battle took place on the slopes of the Pichincha volcano, overlooking Quito. Please note, I am mangling these words. I'm sorry. Because of this location, this presented severe challenges of altitude, terrain, and logistics. Troops ascended narrow mountain trails under difficult conditions before engaging the Spanish defenders. The engagement demonstrated several characteristics that had become hallmarks of Bolivar's military system. First, careful operational planning allowed revolutionary forces to approach the battlefield in a manner that reduced the defenders' advantages. Second, disciplined infantry, supported by aggressive maneuver, maintained cohesion despite rugged terrain. And third, coordination among subordinate commanders prevented localized setbacks from disrupting the overall operation. The victory secured Quito and completed the liberation of modern Ecuador. Strategically, it also linked Gran Colombia with the southern revolutionary movements led by José de San Martín. For the first time, coordinated operations against the remaining Spanish strongholds in Peru became feasible. The meeting between Bolivar and San Martín at Guayaquil in July of 1822 remains one of the most discussed episodes in Latin American history that I had never heard of before I did research for this. Although no detailed official record survives, the strategic issues confronting both leaders are reasonably clear. San Martin had liberated Argentina and Chile and had established a foothold in Peru, but he lacked sufficient military resources to complete the campaign. Bolivar, by contrast, commanded growing armies supported by the resources of Gran Colombia. The conference resulted in San Martin's withdrawal from active leadership, leaving Bolivar responsible for directing the final phase of the continental struggle. Historians continue to debate the political dimensions of the meeting, but from a military perspective, the outcome simplified strategic command. Unity of leadership reduced the risk of conflicting operational priorities and allowed available forces to be concentrated against the principal Royalist armies. Bolivar entered Peru in 1823, under circumstances that would have discouraged many other commanders. Political instability complicated the civil administration. Revolutionary forces remained divided by regional loyalties and competing ambitions. Royalist armies occupied strong defensive positions in the Andes and retained experienced officers accustomed to mountain warfare. Unlike earlier campaigns in Venezuela and New Granada, the conflict in Peru required sustained operations, far from Bolivar's principal logistical base. These challenges again reinforced the importance of logistics. Supplying armies in the Central Andes demanded extraordinary organizational effort. Roads were primitive, transportation depended heavily upon pack animals, and climatic conditions varied dramatically between coastal deserts, mountain passes, and high plateaus. Every advance required detailed planning to ensure that food, ammunition, medical supplies, and replacements remained available despite immense distances. Bolivar increasingly demonstrated an appreciation for what modern military planners describe as operational reach. Armies could advance only as far as the logistics systems permitted. Rather than launching premature offenses, he often delayed operations until sufficient preparations had been completed. Although critics occasionally interpreted these pauses as indecision, they reflected an understanding that strategic patience frequently produced greater long-term success than impulsive action. Another characteristic of Bolivar's mature command style was his careful integration of intelligence into operational planning. Throughout the independence wars, local populations supplied information concerning Royalist movements, terrain, and supply routes. Bolivar cultivated relationships with civilian supporters who functioned as informal intelligence networks. Scouts, guides, merchants, clergy, and local officials all contributed information that improved situational awareness. Equally important was Bolivar's understanding of deception. He repeatedly employed feints, misleading movements, and ambiguous intentions to complicate Spanish decision-making. Rather than allowing the enemy to dictate the tempo of operations, he sought to force Royalist commanders into reactive postures, compelling them to defend multiple potential objectives simultaneously. By 1824, the strategic balance had shifted decisively in favor of the revolutionaries. Royalist authority remained formidable, but increasingly isolated. Reinforcements from Spain became difficult to obtain, while prolonged warfare strained imperial finances. Bolivar recognized that the time had arrived for a decisive campaign designed not merely to capture territory, but to destroy the principal Royalist field armies. The first major engagement occurred at the Battle of Junin on August 6, 1824, and remarkably, the battle involved almost exclusively cavalry. Fighting took place on the high plains of Peru, where mounted maneuver proved more important than infantry firepower. Junin illustrated Bolivar's continued emphasis on offensive spirit and operational flexibility. Initially, Royalist cavalry gained an advantage, threatening to disrupt the Patriot advance. However, a well-timed counterattack by Patriot horsemen reversed the situation. The engagement remained relatively small in terms of casualties, but its psychological impact proved considerable. Patriot morale increased substantially, while confidence within the Royalist ranks declined. Bolivar understood that morale constituted an element of combat power, equal in importance to numerical strength, and, if Napoleon is to believe, 3 times as much. Victories need not annihilate enemy armies to produce strategic effects. Demonstrating superiority in successive engagements gradually weakened the opponent's willingness to continue resistance. All that being said, I'm still going to go with Clausewitz. If you can kill him, do so. Following Junin, Bolivar entrusted operational command to Sucre while he concentrated on maintaining political cohesion and organizing reinforcements. This decision again reflected confidence in subordinate leadership. Sucre had repeatedly demonstrated exceptional competence, and Bolivar recognized that unity of strategic purpose did not require constant personal direction on every battlefield. The decisive encounter occurred at Ayacucho on December 9, 1824. Although Bolivar was not physically present, the campaign represented the culmination of the military system he had developed over more than a decade. Sucre's deployment reflected principles that Bolivar had consistently emphasized.
Revolutionary forces occupied favorable terrain while maintaining flexibility to exploit emerging opportunities. Infantry, cavalry, and artillery operating in close coordination rather than independently. Reserve forces remained available to reinforce threatened sectors or exploit success. The Royalists launched determined attacks, but failed to achieve decisive breakthroughs. As their formations became increasingly disorganized, Patriot counterattacks seized the initiative. Cavalry exploited weaknesses created by infantry engagements, while disciplined maneuver prevented Spanish commanders from restoring cohesion. The defeat here effectively ended organized Spanish military resistance in continental South America. The subsequent capitulation transferred control of Peru and ultimately facilitated the independence of Upper Peru, which adopted the name Bolivia in honor of the liberator. From a military perspective, Ayacucho represented more than a battlefield victory. It marked the successful conclusion of a continental campaign, integrating political leadership, coalition warfare, operational maneuver, logistics, intelligence, and sustained offensive action across nearly 15 years of conflict. Bolivar's methods reveal several enduring strategic principles. Perhaps most important was his commitment to operational mobility. Throughout the independence wars, Bolivar consistently sought to maneuver around enemy strengths rather than attack them directly. The crossing of the Andes remains the most celebrated example, but similar thinking characterized many of his campaigns. He repeatedly exploited geography to create opportunities where conventional analysis predicted failure. Closely related was his understanding of initiative. Bolivar believed commanders should impose dilemmas upon their opponents rather than merely respond to enemy actions. Rapid marches, unexpected axes of advance, and continuous pressure forced Spanish commanders into reactive decision-making. Maintaining operational tempo often proved more valuable than achieving perfect tactical conditions. Bolivar also demonstrated remarkable adaptability. Unlike commanders rigidly committed to predetermined doctrines, he adjusted tactics according to terrain, available resources, and the enemy's behavior. European infantry methods, llanero cavalry techniques, guerrilla operations, and conventional engagements all found places within his military system. Flexibility became a strategic advantage precisely because it prevented opponents from accurately predicting revolutionary behavior. His emphasis upon coalition warfare deserves equal attention. Bolivar never commanded a homogeneous national army. Forces included Venezuelans, New Grenadans, Ecuadorians, Peruvians, British volunteers, Irish veterans of the Napoleonic Wars, indigenous communities, freed slaves, and, of course, the Llanero horsemen. Maintaining unity among such diverse groups required exceptional political as well as military leadership. And rather than demanding uniformity, Bolivar generally sought merely common purpose. Regional identities remained intact, but integrated into broader strategic objectives. Logistics formed another cornerstone of Bolivar's military thought. His early defeats convinced him that bravery alone could not sustain prolonged warfare. Every successful campaign reflected careful attention to supply, transportation, recruitment, communications, and administration. This is not to say shortages weren't constant, but Bolivar increasingly understood that logistical preparation created the conditions under which tactical victories became possible. Bolivar's military leadership was not without limitations. He often underestimated political opposition within liberated territories and sometimes assumed that military success should naturally produce lasting political unity. The fragmentation of Gran Colombia after his retirement demonstrated that military victory could remove colonial authority, but didn't remove regional rivalries or constitutional disagreements. His increasing reliance upon centralized executive authority also generated controversy. Bolivar believed that newly independent states required strong governments capable of preserving order during political transition, and critics feared that such concentration of authority threatened Republican principles. Shades of his criticisms of Napoleon cannot be missed here. This tension between effective military leadership and constitutional governments remained unresolved. By the late 1820s, declining health and growing political divisions increasingly overshadowed Bolivar's achievements. Regional leaders challenged central authority, civil conflict reemerged, and the dream of a unified northern South America gradually dissolved. Bolivar resigned the presidency in 1830 and died later that year, disappointed by the fragmentation of the political system he had struggled to create. But his military legacy endured. Ultimately, Simon Bolivar's greatest accomplishment was not simply the liberation of territory, but the creation of military strategy capable of transforming revolutionary aspirations into enduring strategic success. Through perseverance after repeated defeat, adaptation to changing circumstances, and an unwavering appreciation of the relationship between military operations and political purpose, he reshaped the map of South America. His campaigns remain enduring studies in leadership, operational maneuver, and the complex interaction between war and statecraft, and ensure his deserved place among the most significant military commanders of the 19th century.
Thanks for listening today. If you want to help the show, please share today's episode on any social media sites you can. Check out the War 102 Buzzsprout website for more information and to send me a message. And, of course, my thanks to the subscribers who help keep the show going. Hope you all join me next week. See you soon.